When people first hear the phrase coordinate across teams, it can sound like a polite way of saying everyone should get along, but in real risk work it is much more specific than that. In this episode, we are going to make coordination feel concrete by focusing on the teams that most often collide around AI systems: legal, privacy, security, data, and product. Each of these groups has a real job to do, a real set of concerns, and a real way of talking about problems, and the biggest failures happen when they assume the other groups are handling something that nobody is actually handling. You do not need to be an expert in any one area to understand why alignment matters, but you do need a simple mental model for how these groups connect and where gaps form. By the end, you should be able to explain what each team is responsible for, why their responsibilities overlap, and how to keep AI risk decisions from turning into confusion, delays, or accidental harm. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is to understand what we mean by alignment in everyday terms, because beginners often picture a meeting where everyone shares updates and then goes back to their own work. Alignment is more like building one shared story about what the system is, what it is allowed to do, what it must never do, and how the organization will prove it kept those promises. That story needs to cover rules, ethics, safety, and real-world business goals, all at the same time, without contradictions. If legal says the system cannot make certain claims, product cannot design features that depend on those claims, and data cannot collect information that would push the system toward those claims. If privacy says you need a valid reason to use certain personal data, security cannot rely on that personal data for identity checks unless the privacy basis is actually solid. Alignment is not about being friendly. It is about preventing mismatched assumptions from becoming risk. When teams are aligned, decisions become faster because the same shared constraints guide choices before problems become expensive. It also helps to understand why these 5 teams, in particular, matter so much in AI risk management. Legal is concerned with obligations and liability, which means what you are allowed to do and what happens if you do it wrong. Privacy is concerned with the rights and expectations connected to personal information, which means what data can be used, how it can be used, and what consent and transparency must look like. Security is concerned with protecting systems and information from misuse, which includes keeping attackers out and limiting what happens if something goes wrong. Data teams are concerned with the origin, quality, meaning, and movement of data, which becomes critical because AI is only as safe and fair as the data that shapes it. Product teams are concerned with what is being built, why it matters, and how it will be used by people, which makes them the place where risk choices become real user experiences. If any one of these groups is missing from the conversation, you can end up with a system that works in a demo but fails in the world. Now let's make each team's role feel clearer, starting with legal, because legal often becomes the team that people run to when they are already worried. Legal's role is not to design the model or to tune prompts. It is to interpret obligations and translate them into constraints the organization can actually follow. Legal looks at contracts, intellectual property, consumer protection, employment rules, sector regulations, and the way statements about the system could be judged after a problem occurs. A beginner-friendly way to picture legal is as the team that asks, what promises are we making, and can those promises survive contact with reality? They will also ask what records you need to prove you acted responsibly, because good intentions do not protect you when evidence is missing. If the organization partners with outside vendors, legal will care about who owns what, who is responsible for what, and what happens when a third party fails. Legal alignment means the system's features, data use, and security controls match what the organization can defend. Privacy overlaps with legal, but it is a distinct specialty with its own way of thinking, and that difference is important for coordination. Privacy is deeply focused on personal data, on purpose limits, and on the idea that people should not be surprised by how their information is used. A privacy team will ask where data came from, whether you have a valid reason to process it, how long you keep it, and who can access it. They will also care about how the AI system could reveal personal information indirectly, even when you did not mean to reveal anything, because models can memorize or recreate details in ways that feel strange to beginners at first. Another privacy concern is secondary use, where data collected for one reason is reused for a different reason, which can break trust even if it seems efficient. When privacy is aligned with product, the user experience can include clear explanations and controls that match what the system truly does. When privacy is aligned with data, the organization can prove it is not collecting extra data just because it is available. Security has a role that many beginners think they understand, but AI adds new twists that make security alignment even more important. Traditional security focuses on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, meaning keep data secret when it should be secret, keep it accurate, and keep systems running. With AI, you still have those goals, but the attack surface grows because inputs, outputs, and connections to other systems can be manipulated in subtle ways. Security teams will worry about who can access the model, who can change it, where it runs, how it talks to other services, and what monitoring exists to detect misuse. They also care about how the system fails, because a safe failure is different from a dangerous failure. An AI can fail in ways that look confident while being wrong. Security alignment with privacy matters because security might want more logging to investigate incidents, while privacy might want to reduce logging that contains personal information. Getting them aligned means choosing logging that is useful for safety and investigation while minimizing unnecessary sensitive detail. Data teams are often misunderstood as the group that simply stores data, but in AI work they are closer to the people who can explain what the data actually means. They manage data pipelines, transformations, labeling, and the rules that govern where data is allowed to travel. They care about data quality because low-quality data can produce low-quality decisions, and in risk terms that means unreliable performance and unpredictable behavior. Data teams also care about lineage, which is the ability to trace where data came from and how it changed, because when something goes wrong you need to understand what shaped the model. A key beginner concept is that data is not neutral, even when it looks like a simple table or a folder of documents. Data reflects choices about what was collected, what was ignored, and what was labeled as correct, and those choices can encode bias or errors. When data teams align with legal and privacy, they can prevent illegal or inappropriate data from entering the system in the first place. Product teams are where the system becomes a real thing that people rely on, and that makes them a central player in alignment. Product decides what problem the AI system is supposed to solve, who the users are, how decisions are presented, and what happens when the system is uncertain. Product also controls the feature roadmap, which means they choose whether to build guardrails as part of the product or treat safety as an afterthought. A beginner-friendly way to think about product is as the team that shapes the moments where the user trusts the system, because design choices can encourage healthy skepticism or encourage blind reliance. For example, showing a single confident answer with no explanation creates more risk than showing uncertainty and suggesting the user verify critical details. Product alignment with security matters because product often wants smooth experiences, while security often wants friction where it protects the user. Good alignment is not about always removing friction. It is about choosing the right friction in the right places. Once you know the roles, the next step is to understand why these teams naturally clash, even when everyone is acting in good faith. They clash because they measure success differently and because they carry different kinds of consequences when something goes wrong. Product may measure success by adoption and satisfaction, while privacy measures success by avoiding misuse of personal data and avoiding broken expectations. Security measures success by preventing incidents and reducing blast radius, while data measures success by reliable, high-quality, traceable data flows. Legal measures success by defensible decisions and reduced liability. None of these goals are wrong, but they create tension, especially when time is short and the organization is excited about AI. Coordination is the skill of turning that tension into balanced decisions rather than letting it become chaos. When coordination fails, the organization can end up building something quickly that later must be undone, which is a more painful outcome than building it safely from the start. A simple way to coordinate is to make sure all teams share a single definition of the system and its boundaries, because many disagreements are really disagreements about what the system is. One group might think the AI system is only the model, while another group thinks it includes data collection, user interface, logs, and integrations with other services. If the boundary is unclear, privacy might focus on the training data while ignoring what user inputs are stored, and security might focus on the model endpoint while ignoring how outputs trigger actions in other systems. Product might describe the system in marketing language, while legal needs precise language that can be defended. Data might describe pipelines and schemas that others do not understand. Coordination begins by translating all those views into one shared description in plain language, including what data comes in, what decisions come out, and where the decision is used. Once that shared picture exists, teams can debate the right risks instead of debating different mental models. Another coordination trick is learning how to translate concerns between teams so that each group can act on them. Beginners often assume a privacy concern is a moral complaint, or a legal concern is a vague fear, but each concern can be turned into a specific requirement. If privacy says data minimization is needed, product can translate that into a feature decision that avoids collecting extra fields and avoids long-term storage of unnecessary inputs. If legal says a claim cannot be made, product can translate that into interface language that avoids overstating certainty, and security can translate it into monitoring for outputs that violate the rule. If security says access must be restricted, product can translate that into a user role model and a workflow for approvals. If data says lineage is missing, legal can translate that into a documentation risk, and product can translate it into a release gate that requires provenance before deployment. Coordination is less about agreeing with each other and more about converting each other's language into concrete actions. It is also important to understand the timing of coordination, because a common misconception is that coordination is something you do after development, like a final review. For AI risk, late coordination feels like a crisis because fundamental choices have already been made, such as what data was collected or what features depend on certain outputs. Early coordination changes the shape of the system before it becomes expensive to change. Think of it like building a house. If you only bring in the electrician after the walls are closed, you will pay more and get worse outcomes. Early coordination sets rules such as which data sources are allowed, what kinds of outputs are forbidden, how users should be warned about uncertainty, and what evidence must exist before launch. That does not mean endless meetings. It means the right people agree on the constraints early so that the rest of the work can proceed smoothly. Beginners should remember that coordination is a way to save time, not a way to waste it. A practical way to maintain alignment over time is to treat key decisions as shared decisions with shared ownership, rather than treating them as handoffs. A handoff sounds like one team finishes their part and then tosses the work to another team, but AI risk does not behave well with handoffs because everything is connected. For example, data decisions influence privacy, privacy decisions influence legal defensibility, legal constraints influence product claims, and product design influences security risk. When one team makes a decision alone, the others may discover the impact later, which creates conflict and rework. Shared decision-making does not mean everyone decides everything. It means decisions that affect multiple domains are reviewed by multiple perspectives before they become final. A beginner can think of this as building a habit of asking, who will be impacted by this choice, and did they help define it? That habit is more important than any single document or meeting. Common misconceptions can also sabotage cross-team coordination, so it helps to name them plainly. One misconception is that legal and privacy are the same thing, when in reality they overlap, but ask different questions and can disagree about what is acceptable. Another misconception is that security only cares about hackers, when in reality security also cares about misuse by authorized users and unintended consequences of automation. A third misconception is that data teams are neutral providers, when data choices can create bias, leakage, or compliance problems. Another misconception is that product can fix everything with interface wording, when some risks require deeper constraints on data and model behavior. Finally, beginners sometimes think coordination means finding the safest possible choice, but coordination often means choosing a balanced choice with clear trade-offs and clear protections. When everyone understands that trade-offs are real and must be made explicit, the teams can work together instead of blaming each other. To make this feel more real, imagine a simple AI feature that summarizes customer messages and suggests replies, which sounds harmless until you look at it through the different team lenses. Product may want fast and helpful suggestions that keep users engaged, and they may want to store messages to improve quality. Privacy will immediately ask whether those messages contain personal information and whether users expect their content to be reused for improving the system. Legal will ask what claims are being made about accuracy and whether the system could generate harmful or misleading replies that create liability. Security will ask who can access the messages, how they are protected, and whether attackers can manipulate inputs to cause harmful outputs. Data will ask about how messages are collected, cleaned, labeled, and traced, and whether the dataset reflects a fair range of users. None of these questions is optional if you want a trustworthy system, and coordination is the practice of answering them together so that the final design is coherent. Even this simple example shows why alignment is not a luxury, because the feature touches multiple risk areas at once. As you wrap your head around coordination, it helps to adopt a beginner-friendly checklist mindset without turning it into a rigid ritual. The central question is always whether the organization has one consistent set of decisions about goals, data, controls, and evidence, and whether every team can explain how their part supports that set. If the privacy story says the system does not retain sensitive inputs, the security story and the data story must match that reality. If the legal story says the organization can prove due care, there must be security monitoring and data lineage that make that proof possible. If product says users remain in control, there must be design choices that allow humans to review and override, not just a statement that humans are responsible. Alignment means there are no hidden contradictions where one team's solution quietly breaks another team's promises. When contradictions are found early, they can be resolved in a calm way. When found late, they become emergencies. A good closing way to think about this topic is to remember that AI risk is not owned by one team, and coordination is the skill that turns many partial views into one safe, defensible, and usable system. Legal helps you understand obligations and avoid making promises you cannot keep. Privacy helps you respect people and limit harmful uses of personal data. Security helps you prevent misuse and reduce damage. Data helps you ensure the system is built on traceable and reliable information. And product helps you shape how real users experience the system. When these groups work in isolation, risk hides in the seams between them, where nobody is watching carefully. When they align, risk becomes visible early, decisions become clearer, and the organization can move faster with fewer unpleasant surprises. For a brand new learner, the big lesson is that coordination is not paperwork and it is not politics. It is a practical safety habit that keeps AI systems from drifting into avoidable harm. If you can explain how these teams connect and why their perspectives must be combined, you are already thinking like an AI risk professional.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.